be away from the adults, to talk about things we weren't supposed to, and to discover secrets that the adults didn't want us to know. But when we got out in the woods, all of the machinations, the gossip about Pokemon, the bullying, the quiet kids like me, all of it seemed to matter less in the face of that twisting shape. It's a shape that we all know. An engineer couldn't draw it for you. A mathematician couldn't calculate it because it's a thing that is made to trick the brain. It's a sick joke. Like, in many ways, many of our lives are. Things that our minds can't possibly wrap themselves around or comprehend, but that they're fascinated with nonetheless. That's the shape that evening on that camping trip you saw in the darkness of the woods. Twisting and turning. That flashed back one night a few years later when you were asleep and it was an ordinary night. You were going to get up and go visit some friends, but a book on the shelf above your bed happened to fall when you were in a deep moment of sleep and dreams, and it called you from something beyond your consciousness and beyond your mind. It called you back into the world with that one screaming crash. And all the fear that you remember feeling when that Baptist minister talked about the eternal torments of hell when you were young. That fear was nothing compared to what you felt when that book fell beside your head, because it reached into some part of your mind, something that's coded to help you escape the demons of an ancestral environment, going back to the lizards that we share ancestors with. That reaction that is just meant to get you moving, to get you awake, that hit you, and you were filled with fear. You ran upstairs and you called your father, and even though you were old teen then, you asked if you could stay in your parents' room that night because you were so afraid, and they said alright. But the problem was that they had this statue of the Virgin Mary across from their bed, and they weren't religious. It was just sort of there because it was a gift that someone who was religious had given them, and it was pretty enough. She was, holding a Virgin Christ. She didn't look sexual. She was supposed to look caring, and she did on the surface, but somewhere deep within her there was that unholy goddamn ratio. And it was that even though this was supposed to be at most infinite of beings, that Christ, who was created to save us, and his pure and virginal mother, something about her purity twisted around, and it reminded you of that night in the woods, of the thing that you saw there beyond words. And you were overcome with fear and rage and just the sheer feeling of staring into the void, and those eyes watched you. And for just a moment you remembered something that all of you kids saw there in the woods. You were like Mary then. You were pure. Your minds were occupied only with sort of innocent fascination with the perverse that all children have. You wanted to talk about sex and drugs, but you didn't really want to do those things. And in that night, you could see something that all of the complications and fuck-ups of adulthood concealed. You felt torn, like everything that you've been building, everything your parents had nurtured in you, that faith in the Virgin Mary or in Muhammad or in Buddha or in the Force, all that, you looked through it into that pure virginal void, and you saw the shape of the thing that lurks beyond the stars. And you looked your peers in the eye, and for a moment you all recognized that the names you called one another, and the booze that you'd planned to sneak from your parents, and the sex that you thought you'd have someday, all of it meant nothing in the face of that twisted shape. A scream that lies in the void behind every star. Do you remember it now? Close your eyes and you'll see the shapes forming. They're not the shape of this thing, they're just echoes of it. Just as you are an echo of something far greater and far more terrible. There are so many